Greetings, Earthlings. It's time to jump in our time machine and head back. How far back? 1945. Let's have a look at the Morgan Park Women's Club cookbook. This cookbook is filled with ads, which are actually from all over the South Side, but we're going to keep it down here, Beverly, Washington Heights, Morgan Park. We're going to have a look at a few recipes, have a closer look at the people that penned those recipes, cook them up, see what they taste like, and have a ride around the area, take a look at the current locations of some very old businesses and see what we find. Let's head out. Over here at 9962 Vincennes, Washington Heights, previously the home of Spirit the Lord Christian Church. Much previous to that, the home of Mentzer's Paint. Need some paint? Come on down to Vincennes. Get red, purple. My favorite color, mauve. Over here at 10234 Vincennes, Six Corners, 10 Tray Vincennes and Beverly. Looking for 10234 Vincennes and 10245 Beverly. We got the small strip mall here. Many years ago, home to Bears Grocery. Bears was here for decades. Opened in 1887, closed in the late 50s. Started by Mr. Bear, took over by his son, and ran it till it couldn't be run no more. You need dry goods, you need a little of this, a little of that, head down to Bears. 10459 Southwestern, currently the home of a grassy lot. Once upon a time, the home to Paul Feldman's Restaurant. The namesake, Paul Feldman, lived over at 110th and Artesian with his wife Muriel. Paul was born way back in 1911, his wife 8 years later in 1919. And the 1945 census said he was putting in 60 hours as a restaurant manager. Sure was. Looks like he was even looking for a waitress or two back in the day. You need some help when you're running your own spot. Today's recipe, the luncheon souffle, comes to us courtesy Hazel Wagenhouse. She also submitted a few other recipes for whole wheat bread and fudge squares, which I found elsewhere in the cookbook. Hazel was born in 1897 in Missouri, making her in her mid-40s at the time of this cookbook's writing. She was a high school graduate, and she was living with her husband, William Sr., and their son, William Jr., who was 16 years old at that time. William Sr. was born in 1893, also a high school graduate. That would have put him at a similar age to Hazel, around 47 years old in 1940. His occupation was listed as an assistant credit manager in the steel industry. In 1940, they were living at 539 West 104th Street. They did own the home, the whopping value of $4,000, making it approximately $87K today. That house was built in 1923 and still stands. In 1950, they moved about 2 blocks away to 104th and Normal. Newspaper archives of the era come back with a number of results for the precocious Miss Wagenhouse's social goings-on in her community. While they lived in Roseland, she was of course a member of the Morgan Park Women's Club, jumping across borders there, and she was also a member of the Fernwood Country Club. Now, I wasn't sure what to make of that, not familiar with any country club in the area. I was familiar with Fernwood as a neighborhood of Roseland, and when I checked the map, I find that the two domiciles they resided in the 40s and 50s were just a block or so away from Fernwood Park, and a little more digging shows that this was more of a social club with a facetious name. Newspaper clippings come back with her travels, visiting friends and relatives, and people visiting her, and of course, her rank and goings-on with the Fernwood Country Club. I'm very excited to try her luncheon souffle. Luncheon souffle. This is light as air. It looks really dense and stodgy until you scoop out of there, and it's like a hot air balloon. The red and green is a completely unintentional Christmas thing, which is just in a couple weeks. And even if it wasn't Christmas, it's just beautiful to look at. It's so delicate, like an appetizer or a starter. You think mashed potatoes and hot dogs is like as basic meat and potatoes as it gets, but then it's not that at all. It looks like mashed potatoes until you eat it, and it's like air. I also used half and half instead of milk. I bring that up in the context of these are mashed potatoes, but they have egg yolks and half and butter, and it is the lightest thing in the world. Cheers to the Fernwood Country Club, the Wagon House family of Roseland. Like pretty much every recipe I've cooked from every church cookbook so far, it's never what you expect. Red number 5, or whatever cancerous food coloring is in the Filipino hot dogs, has seeped out into some of the potatoes. Huge win for the luncheon souffle. I wonder if this was ever served at the Fernwood Country Club to Miss Wagenhouse and her friends. I hope so. Over here at 11059 South Hoyne, previously the home to Bashir Chiropractors. This historic house has been here a very long time, much longer than even my old cookbook. And I found an interesting history on the Bashir family. 11059 South Hoyne was built in 1923, making it 100 years old as of this video. The county assessor lists it as a multi-family dwelling with 2 apartments. Number of bedrooms is unknown, but it does have 5 bathrooms and 3 fireplaces. The county recorder of deeds shows the same owner from 1986 until about 2022, when the current owner took possession with a mortgage for $574,000. In 1931, it was being operated as the Casa de Loma Tea House by Miss Blanche Dunlop Battles. There was a lot of buzz about the tea house in that year. About 10 years later, there were some very different tenants. Russian-born Dr. Noor Bashir and his American wife Nellie reopened the business as a chiropractor, where they also lived with their 3 sons. All of this checks out in the 1940 census, and as late as 1949, newspaper ads start to pop up. In the 1950 census, they were still residing at the home, though it looks like their eldest son, Omar, had moved out. The doctor's credentials as chiropractor are questionable, however, since it seemed that most of his curative powers came from colonics, according to these ads. The newspaper ads continued through 1950. Dr. Bashir passed away in 1972, at that time still showing the same address at 110th and Hoyne. Today's dessert, coconut pudding, comes to us from a Mrs. Louise Higman. Louise was born in 1881, making her 62 years old in 1943, born in Michigan. She did graduate high school. Her and her husband, H.D., aka Harris, had no children. Harris was born in New York in 1873, which makes him 67 at the time of the 1940 census. He had a couple years of college. The census lists him as an insurance agent, and a number of citations in newspapers of the era back that up. Found this very cool newspaper article regarding residents of Morgan Park resisting being annexed by Chicago. Also came across him getting a hearty congratulations with some other local residents of Morgan Park for going out of their way to shovel and plow snow and cut weeds and keep the neighborhood looking great, as it still does today. And I also found this ad where they are attempting to rent out their most attractive furnished apartment on Sheridan Road. Louise pops up here as a member of the Young Mothers Club of the Morgan Park Methodist Episcopal Church, which is just around the corner from their home at 11288 Lothair. Their home was valued at $12,000 at that time, which is $263,000 today. In the early 80s, that home and others were raised to build the Morgan Park Academy Fieldhouse. Coconut pudding. This one just about broke me down. Add major confusion with the vague procedure as described in the recipe, calling for 1 tablespoon gelatin dissolved with cold water over hot water. Is it asking for a tablespoon of this, dry powder, or a tablespoon of gelatin, meaning the finished solution, as in this, which, how much fun, this is the excess left over from last night. So I ended up using a cup of water to a packet, and I think that was way too much water. It might have still worked, but I really wasn't clear, so I went ahead and just like splashed in 3 or 4 ounces when I already had soft, almost hard peaks on my whipped cream. Completely deflated it, destroyed it. It was a soupy mess. It went into the garbage. I was really upset. So I got in the car and drove to the store, and I bought more whipping cream and more sugar, and I whipped another batch of whipped cream. And this time I used 1 tablespoon of solution. It specifically says does not need cake, perhaps salted nuts. I found these amazing coconut cashews that I could put in a feed bag like a horse and eat all of them. Also love the spelling. It's like cocoa nut, as if a coconut is related to the cocoa plant that makes hot chocolate. Enough talking, I gotta get involved in this. Way too much work went into this one. I was really curious what the texture of the whipped cream would be like. I worried, is it gonna have a little bit of a jello thing going? It doesn't. It's kind of dense, but it's still whipped cream. It's still mostly air. The stabilized whipped cream is stabilized enough to make it look right and do what it needs to do structurally, but you wouldn't know eating it. There's no gelatin type texture or anything going on. By the way, speaking of the gelatin, this expired, quote unquote, in 2015. 8 years ago, going on 9 years ago. Shout out to Louise Higman. This is an absolute bell ringer. This is out of control good. Here at 107.54 Western, Toccola Seafood, previously the home of Toccola Seafood. Some things never change. Let's step inside and get a bite to eat. Thanks for sticking around, kids, and soldiering through this chilly late fall day, Morgan Park, checking out the Women's Club Cookbook. It's nothing better than putting a little bit of fuel in the time machine, heading back 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. How far can you go? Only one way to find out. Get yourself a cookbook, get in the kitchen, get on the bike, pound the streets. Catch you in the next one.